open your chat box. During this session today, we will use chat exclusively for communication, for your questions, for some interactive activities, and we'll go into that in more detail here in just a moment. But thinking about your current role in education, enjoy our friend here as he navigates this precarious situation. All right, my friends, we've seen our friend navigating this pretty tricky situation here, and I'm going to now invite you to take a moment and compose a response in the chat. Seeing our pup, thinking about how this video reflects the experiences of being an educator over the past several years. Drop a note to us in the chat. We'll be calling some of those out to share them with the group. While we do that, I'll share with you that the first time I saw this, I absolutely couldn't believe my eyes. And that's how I often feel about educators when I see all the things that they're navigating. Simply dropping a response in chat. How does this video reflect what you have known as the experiences of being an educator over the past several years? I know some of you are joining us. I can see from your name icons that you may be on devices that may be tricky to type into the chat on. That's fine. Piper, what does this video make you think about being an educator over the past several years?
Every time I see it, and I've seen it a few times now, I just think about the uncharted territory as we went into the pandemic, and nobody had ever done virtual classrooms, and we were in kitchens across the country, kind of navigating something new while the whole world watched. And so I don't know, I just always think about all that we have had to navigate, and that it's been a little bit like that dog, just kind of like, I don't know where I'm going, but I'm just going to keep going. And I love the tenacity of the dog. He's like, it's okay, I don't know where I'm going, but he just keeps going. So I see that in our educators, whether it's superintendents, principals, or teachers. They've had to navigate so much. So yeah, I love it. I like somebody dropped in there, reflects the challenge of student learning during and after the COVID-19 pandemic, as well as my first 2 years as a superintendent. Wow, that would be a whopper to join education as a superintendent in that space. Another one says it has been a balancing act of trying to accomplish, I love that, the balancing act, right? To accomplish all the expectations given to us, but not having all the tools needed. Hello. Yep. And that we just keep trying. Like that dog just keeps trying, right? He's not giving up. I think I would have jumped right on off of those. So those are some great responses. There's one
I love
last.
it.
This is a perfect reflection of what being an educator is. So many things to test. Try, learn, fail, and try again, etc. I'd love to use it for a mentor training. I know it's amazing.
Awesome.
Yeah.
So true. And this piece here of, so we're dealing with so many issues at once and not enough support. So that's what I was thinking about. He's got a rope in his mouth, he's blindfolded, and he's walking across 2 different tightropes essentially above ground. So the complexity of the things that he's navigating, that we still just don't know what the actual ultimate expectation is, right? So, and the lack of support. There's nobody there guiding him, giving him advice, suggesting what to do next, pointing him in the right direction. And it absolutely reflects classroom educators, building leaders, support staff, you name it, that role that you might hold in a school or a district. We've seen that. We've experienced it. Some people say that video actually gives them a little bit of the shivers because it really does hit home. And we start the conversation with that today, my friends, as Piper and I are here excited to share with you a bit of a result or an outcome of our own time during the pandemic and following the pandemic in watching educators like yourselves walking just such a tightrope and being just absolutely astounded by the tenacity, as Piper said, the courage, the bravery, and also the skills that were put into practice. And we put all that together into a book that we hope will now be a beacon or something that could serve for others to learn from around habits of resilient educators. And it really is a book that's built on your expertise. And we may not have met, but I'm going to call it your expertise because you've lived this. And so that parallels, that it mirrors that experience that we observed. We spent about 3 years together working in Las Vegas, Nevada for Clark County School District, where we were both leadership coaches there for the past several years. And between the two of us, we've determined we've conducted almost 3,000 instructional rounds over those 3 years, in and out of classrooms every day. We watched teachers teaching, we watched teachers in PLCs, we coached teachers, we coached their leaders, and throughout all of that, pulling it into a real synthesis of information. We know there's best practices that work, but they're not exclusively around pedagogy. They're also tied to personal practices. And that's where we come into this book, Habits, Behaviors of Personal and Professional Practice of Educators that we describe as resilient, but ultimately knowing that these are practices that lead us to become resilient. And we're so grateful for New Hampshire ASCD to bring us to you today, to invite you to join our journey and be a part of our conversation. My name is Lindsay Prendergast. Just a brief introduction, you can call me Lindsay. We are now friends, but I come to you now, I'm actually in Georgia, where I'm working for Charlotte Danielson's Framework for Teaching. So I travel around, again, supporting schools and leaders in that realm. But I have been in and out of different school settings for about the past 20 years. And it's a true pleasure to be here alongside one of my best friends in education and life, Piper Lee, and I'll pass the torch to her.
Lindsay, the one thing I'll just say about today is that at the heart of the work that we've done alongside each other is that we're just teachers. We just have teachers' hearts. We seen a lot of districts and different procedures and routines and programs, absolutely. And I think it's been the greatest opportunity to be able to give back with this book, Habits of Resilient Educators. I like to always share that I did all these leadership things, and then in the year of the pandemic, I went back to the classroom. And so in Florida, I taught third grade. I always said I wanted to go back for one more year after I retired, but I went back before then, and it was like grandma goes back to school. It was such a hoot. Had a blast, but I also realized the pressure and how intense education has gotten. I whipped out Harry Wong's First 6 Weeks of School book at that time because I needed to be grounded, even as a veteran teacher and educator, in like, what are those procedures and routines? What are the things that I'm supposed to do? Because I had been out of the classroom for a hot minute. And so it's been interesting because Harry Wong, you and I have talked about over and over again, and he has recently passed away. And I just so appreciated what he did for me in the field of education. And it's our heart's desire that we would be giving back and help ground teachers in those habits of resiliency. So with further ado, let's hop on into some of them.
All right, so taking a moment here, just take a glance at the screen, just taking a peek at our intentions for learning with you today. I'll summarize them for you as you get comfortable. Our goal today is to spend roughly 45 minutes to an hour together. We're going to take you through several of the habits explicitly in some interactive activities that you can take away and even put into practice when you leave today. And that's going to ground your understanding of how habits such as these from our framework when practiced with consistency, can support teachers' efficacy, personal well-being, and ability to manage change. And we're going to zero in on two of those. One is going to be around using data to drive decisions. And you may say, Lindsay, this is not my first rodeo. I know how to use data, thanks, but I want you to think about how we're going to present this, and you'll situate your learning in that piece in understanding its support of equitable learning environments, high expectations for all, and developing confident, capable teachers through the lens of some practices that we root in understanding how bias might influence the way that we make up stories, and that data can serve as a bias buster. And think about the teachers that you know who might benefit from an experience and learning more around how data can be serving in that way. And then the next piece will then center around another habit that Piper will lead you through around navigating negativity. I'm going to venture to guess that you will all say, no, Lindsay, no, there's no negativity in education, not in our school, not in our district, but we have seen it in some of the places we've worked. So just humor us here and entertain that idea that maybe it does exist. And she's sharing with you some skills there on really understanding it proactively, working towards that resiliency piece so that you can navigate negativity and really sustain your own personal well-being and withstand those external influences that kill our joy. Nobody wants to kill joy. Piper's going to invite you to understand why we chose these habits.
I'm going to get myself off mute here, my famous trick. So teaching, like Lindsay has indicated, it can be unpredictable. Just like the dog, we saw there was some unpredictability. He had the blindfold on, and we may feel that way ourselves as we navigate the education landscape. It can be extremely stressful. I think right now, then as the nation gears up to take a lot of the state testing, and just the anxiety is through the roof. I've seen a lot of memes on Instagram of kind of the end of your stress load. And so it's very real. And so as we are sharing some of this, one of the things our heart's desire is that teachers and educators, that you connect and know you're not alone in these spaces, that these are actually common themes throughout education. It can be very frustrating. We think we're going one direction, maybe with a program or a curriculum or with administration, and then we have a powerful pivot, and it's always about that adaptability, but it can be very frustrating. It can be exhausting. Just the long hours and the emotional exhaustion that educators are experiencing on a daily basis is definitely, we see a lot of overwhelm, especially around that exhaustion. A lot of teachers you see carrying around their coffee cups, right? Like just getting by, drinking as much caffeine as they can. And it can also be very isolating. And so as we teach in our classrooms and we're with our students, our learners, that can feel very isolating. Some of the pandemic even increased that isolation and continues to. So the goal, right, is thinking about how these habits can help us. But we recognized this is what teachers were facing. What our goal is that we would affect student learning. So we think about the efficacy in John Hattie's work and around collective teacher efficacy. And so if we all bring our strengths and we work together, that will impact all student growth and achievement. And he's got a lot of research on that. And then the mental bandwidth of learning and implementing cognitively demanding complex work of teaching. And so when we have these habits and we are rooted in them and we are purposely practicing them, it helps to lighten or provide space in our brains for that cognitive load so that we can learn things like the reading of science or different initiatives that we're being faced with. So with further ado, we will start to dive into some of these.
And we think about the specific habits that we'll share with you in a moment. We just invite you to consider why these habits might have anything to do with good teaching, because when you hear them, you might say, hey, those are things that I'm pretty familiar with, or some may be new. But you may have been in a position at some point, particularly in the last few years, when you heard the word resilience and you might have cringed a little bit. You said, listen, like it's not just as easy as saying, buck up, keep going, and it'll all be okay. And educators can be at risk for people, again, misunderstanding the depth of the complexity of the work and saying, keep going, you're a hero, keep going, just try harder, it'll all work out. It's more than just accepting those inevitable challenges. Resilience is actually a skill set that takes intentional cultivation. And so we've grounded this particular structure of the habits around research in positive psychology, for instance, connecting it to proven teaching and learning strategies, for example, collaboration, tied to collective efficacy, for example, goal setting practices we know are rooted in research as well, and learning strategies that are going to help build that confidence and control for teachers that lead you to become more resilient. Nobody arrives at a perfect state of resilience ever. But if you have ever had a chance to read the book, Atomic Habits, if you haven't, I highly recommend it. One of my favorite quotes here is connected to this work, that is, habits are the compound interest of self-improvement. So as we look at these habits, we think about the fact that we may have skills in some of them and better in others, and others we can grow, but it's about continuous, ongoing daily practice. And as those little tiny 1-degree shifts build upon themselves, we gain immensely over time, and so do our students. So inviting you now to think about habits. We are using the chat a lot today, and I'll say if you are on a device that doesn't enable you to chat, I'll ask, because we're a nice small group, you're welcome to actually just hop off mute and share. But when you think about habits of any kind in any area of your life, what do they help you to do as an educator? Drop that in chat, or if you're on a device that doesn't enable you to chat, you can come off mute and share. What do habits help you to do as an educator? We'll get the conversation started again too. Piper, what have you had some habits that have helped you as an educator?
You know, I think about prioritizing the calendar. And so as a classroom teacher, I remember thinking to myself, you must master your calendar or your calendar will master you. And so making sure that when I was at school, I made sure that I gave 100% and I compartmentalized my personal life. I needed to remain at home and I needed to focus on school, but I really focused on mastering that calendar, right? Whether it
I
was
love it.
meetings or whatever that was. So yeah, definitely mastering the calendar.
I'm seeing a couple of comments in here too that just tied exactly to what we're thinking here, of that their habits enable them to breathe. A really simple, succinct way of putting it, but so true. Or a habit of getting into nature every day that enables her to start the day in a calm and positive attitude. So a habit of trying to shut off outside distractions. These are things that we do as a routine practice that are not overly complex, but we know that they are going to enable us to be more effective at the more complex work of teaching. So we practice them regularly and routinely. And I think about, as a new educator myself, nothing was a habit yet. Everything was new. Nothing was a routine. And so a habit of, for example, making sure that I allocated the last 20 minutes of my day at school to at least initially develop the plans that I was going to be working on when I got home that evening. I set aside that time every day, and I thanked myself later for making that a habit, because it just kind of wrapped things up right in the moment when it was still fresh and then set the stage. And Bill, thanks. Sharing a habit of getting tomorrow ready before I head to bed ties just to what I shared too. It lowers the stress. It's a little bit of closure, right? So these are great examples, setting the stage for Piper sharing with you an overview of what the habits are inside this book.
And did you share the slide, Lynn? Because I am not seeing it.
Oh, that's interesting. If others cannot as well, let me know. I seem to be sharing, but I'll get it started. Piper is,
There
I
we
will
go.
just call this to the, I was going to say, Piper has, her computer is her very best friend. It
It
always
is.
works perfectly, right?
Yeah,
So you
it's
can
just
see it
you're
now.
like, hey, I
In,
might
Okay.
habits around my computer.
inside the book, is that the slide?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, we
Yeah.
can see it.
Yeah, you're good. Okay.
Okay.
All right. So the the one thing I just want to say is we spent a lot of time, like Lindsay said, looking at these habits. And the last one you'll notice is building resilience with the habits. And so it is that resiliency. And so when we use the other 9 habits, that's where the 10th one comes, is that resiliency really is a through line throughout, but it ends up being the 10th habit. So the first one is clarifying your why. Why are we educators? Why are we showing up day after day? And so really setting that purpose in place, not only for you personally, but also for your team, for your colleagues. This is where a lot of times schools will do mission statements, or districts will do a mission statement of some sort. Collaborate, don't isolate. We noticed in our rounds that those teachers that were really working hard to collaborate were really being highly effective and efficient, and showing that resiliency as well. And we did a lot of research on that, and that really is that John Hattie work of collective teacher efficacy. So collaborate, don't isolate. Set high expectations for all. In this space, we get into looking at some data and thinking about blind spots, and making sure that we're using evidence around ourselves and our students and our colleagues as we set those goals and expectations, using data to drive decisions. One thing I'm going to just comment here is that some of these, they are very distinct habits, but they do have some overlay, and there is some intersection between some of them. So even as I'm thinking about using data to drive decisions, we would want to be using data so that we can set high expectations for all. The next one is establish procedures and routines. A lot of this goes back to some of that Harry Wong work, right? But we have some procedures and routines in this book that are more reflective of our current culture. Setting efficient goals. And so we start very granular, setting your own personal goals, professional goals, team goals, classroom goals, student goals, that kind of thing. Get and use feedback effectively. So a lot of times when we have seen or I've even received feedback, I might armor up because I'm not used to receiving feedback, or I'm not used to providing feedback for my peers or students. So we really dive into that habit as well. Prioritize amidst a sea of initiatives. This one has been a theme for me. We wrote it, a year and a half ago, but as I have worked in one of the largest school districts here in Clark County, Las Vegas schools, the last 3 years, but this year they've been rolling out a new ELA curriculum. And so I can see over and over again the need to prioritize the learning for the teachers, as we've had a sea of initiatives hitting them with all the new curriculum programs that are being pushed out. Avoiding the negativity. This was it's one of my favorite habits that we write about, but it was actually one of the hardest. And so we'll dive into that one a little bit today. And then again, that 10th one is the through line. It's the collective of all of the habits working together to build resiliency.
Great. So just highlighting that that's the collective series of the book. Today, we're going to take you through a couple of interactive activities for 2 of the habits, talking around data and navigating negativity. And in doing so, again, we'll mention that we'll be using the chat as we can. If you're able to come off mute, great. But know that these are activities that you're welcome to borrow, steal, use, share as you will. If you'd like the slides after this too, that's perfectly fine. You can sit back and enjoy. We can share those through NHASCD after this. So thinking about the habit of using data to drive decisions. Data is a part of our world as educators. But as we think about what does that mean to make data use a habit? How do we distill that into something as simple as a routine practice? We're going to drill into specific practices of what exactly characterizes effective data use. How do we then make it a habit? And what do we look like when we're crossing over to that habit of collaboration and using it with collaborative inquiry cycles, for example? And finally, into this idea of how do we invite students then into collecting learning evidence themselves and really bringing that student piece into the data habit as well. So thanks, Kate, for also sharing that this past piece of this other habit I'm mentioning at the end here around that, our habit of reminding all of our educators that we're here to support students. I just wanted to call that out. I love that you make a habit of that. So again, in the chat, a little thought prompt here. You see an image on the screen. I'll call it out for you just in case you're on your phone. It is an image of a treasure map with a camera on it, little magnifying glass. We're looking like we might go on a treasure hunt. And the phrase on the screen I'd like you to finish is the sentence stem. Data use is like a treasure hunt because. And at this point, then drop a note or two in chat. Why is data use potentially like a treasure hunt? Piper will giggle every time I use this phrase because she's probably sick of hearing it, but it ties to one of my favorite phrases that we go on data use as if we were on a treasure hunt because we never know what we're going to find, but we're going to keep that positive outlook. We're not going on a witch hunt. We're looking at asset-focused practices. We're looking for powerful practices. We have uncharted territory in front of us. Those are some examples of finishing that sentence stem. You're welcome to drop in chat. Data use is like a treasure hunt because. We have a moment of think time. This one often gets a chuckle from educators. When I think about data use as a treasure hunt, even as I observe PLCs, for example. I love it, Penny. We can recognize hidden gems. Yes. What can we uncover? What can we discover? All those things that we can think about when we approach with an inquiry mindset. So as we develop data as a habit, we ground this understanding in what data as an effective habit is and what it is not. Data use as an effective habit is grounded in pre-established learning goals or expectations. Effective data use requires a process so that you can make meaning from that information. Thanks, Jan, for sharing that, with a treasure hunt, you don't know what jewels and nuggets you may find. It's that unknown. So remain curious. And case in point here, as data use being an effective habit is grounded in curiosity and inquiry and enhanced when used collaboratively. There may be riches here from Marlene that are hidden from clear view that students are able to provide in their learning. I love the way you phrase that. There may be riches. Think of the rewards we can reap if we don't only use data to evaluate completed activities. That has a place in time, but not the only place in time. For example, not only using data just to complete or to evaluate assessments or actions after the fact, it is also not best done when done without intentionality or purpose, when we don't have a destination towards which we might be heading, and it is also not as effective if it is based on an affirming of a pre-existing assumption or by chance perpetuating existing belief systems, which is a piece we're going to dive into next. When we think about our practice as an educator, I'm sharing with you here statements I have made, statements I have thought as an educator. These are assumptions, and I'll share them with you. And you might think to yourself, I might have done the same. Or nope, never did that, never said it. Just either way, hear me out. My assumptions have been, oh, those are just my low babies over there. They can't do it. I'm just bad at math. Please don't ask me to do that problem. My class is so behind this year. He's never on time to school. She always gives up whenever I ask her to read out loud. There's no way my kids can do that assignment. Thinking about the ways those statements are rooted in my assumptions and how they could have been influenced by bias. We're going to do a brief review of how bias can influence our use of data and vice versa. So when we think about bias that influences as an educator, there's a variety of types of bias. We're going to focus on a few. Confirmation bias. This is the tendency to search for, interpret, favor, or recall information in a way that confirms or supports one's prior beliefs or values. Just as I said, they're always late. I said that after I had seen evidence and I wanted to believe that that was always going to be the case. Or an affinity bias, the tendency to prefer others who share similar qualities to ourselves. I was guilty of this as an administrator, where I was particularly aligned with teachers who were like me, who may have been a little bit more outgoing, who like to volunteer to do things. And that played out in ways that some teachers felt maybe that I favored others over them. Or an attribution bias, the tendency to attribute something problematic or challenging about a student as inherently part of their personality and unchangeable. For example, a problematic behavior or the tendency to not turn work in is then saying they're lazy, and we're attributing that to being something that is fixed. So thinking about this, how might one of these biases, a confirmation bias, an affinity bias, or an attribution bias, show up in a classroom? Again, I'll invite you to think about your ideas, share them in the chat. Piper and I'll brainstorm a couple. Any ideas that you're willing to share, Piper?
Well, I think about that confirmation bias and that just how often that actually probably showed up as a teacher, especially as a young educator. I think you want to make it confirm either whether look, I did really great in teaching informational text, and I can make this data kind of represent that. And so I think sometimes it's about stepping back and checking myself, confirmation bias. Honestly, I'm even giggling because I'm working with NWA, which is an assessment and research company. And one of the things that we're looking at is a new product to see if the product is working. And I'm thinking to myself, I wonder if we have a little confirmation bias in that I need to make sure I'm getting with another thought partner to analyze that with me. So, yeah.
Interesting. And I think about the rounds that we've done together, Piper, too, where when we didn't look at data before doing instructional rounds, for example, we had predisposed or pre-existing biases perhaps towards certain classroom practices that we wanted to affirm were effective when we went and looked at them.
Absolutely.
We needed some data to help us unpack that before we did go in those classrooms.
Yeah.
So we're going to go through some practices again that here you can take home with you if you like, to use data as a bias buster. These practices we're going to do a brief overview of are going to be converting assumptions to evidence, gathering learner context, engaging in collaborative inquiry cycles, conducting a data inventory, and going on that treasure hunt, not a witch hunt, for powerful practices. I'm going to give you a brief overview of several of these. For example, a story for each of them, an example that relates to real classroom practices that we may have seen. So converting assumptions to evidence. So we want to shift away from a statement that's a general observation. For example, my new student doesn't want to participate in any group discussions, to deriving assumptions that student is unprepared or doesn't understand the topic, but then lead to actions, only ever placing that student with other quiet students, for example, or asking them less cognitively demanding questions, deducting points even for participation. We want to move towards comparing other learning evidence sources. We have this assumption we may have built by a few select moments of observation. We didn't see them participate. What other learning evidence sources can we gather from that student? Conversations, classroom formative assessments, watching them collaborate with other students, for example, to offset that bias we may be predisposed to. Maybe we offer the entire class a learning experiences survey and we collect an entire comprehensive set of data from the whole group there to better understand the class dynamics and, again, minimize the impact of that potential assumption that we had developed simply by making a judgment or an observation assumption, if you will, on a few simple behaviors. So converting assumptions to evidence, we make sure that we bust those biases with some data. Another practice, gathering learner context to inform instructional planning. We may at times sit down to plan instruction and we have maybe a prepared curriculum that's been provided to us. That's often the case these days. We see more and more. And those resources might be at risk for being very monocultural, for example. They've been given to us as is, and we need to then think through, hey, these don't really attend to the students' lived experiences of my class. When we're developing those plans, we need to use that source of information, that data that we gathered from those, for example, empathy interviews earlier on, to add on to that, build out a data source of students' funds of knowledge. We can gather family surveys, that's a source of data. We can conduct interest inventories with our students, another source of data. That information completes the picture as then I go to plan instruction and ensure that the resources I'm providing are not only high quality, but they are also aligned to our students' identities. They're going to connect more with that material and therefore have deeper learning. Another practice is to engage in collaborative inquiry cycles. You'll hear us talk in another habit chapter around collaboration. Collaboration deepens our own learning and then deepens the impact on our own students. When we are alone and analyzing data, just as we've seen before, when we are at risk for those biases that we mentioned, those are stories we make up in our own heads. We know that data can help offset those, but we're just as at risk for misinterpreting a source of data. For example, I may look at a class's assessment results. I have affirmation bias when I'm approaching, and I want to make sure that I'm confirming what I believed is that these students are up here and these are down here, or I might have blind spots to whatever it is that I'm seeing in that overall picture of the students, the classroom performance. So we want to move towards suspending judgment. We get together with our colleagues in those collaborative inquiry cycles and go through a powerful predictions process. Before making any decisions or judgments or analyses of that data, powerful predictions then afford us the opportunity to generate multiple theories of causation or why as a group, and we benefit from one another's expertise, their ideas, that brainstorming power, all again leading us towards better use of data. Those are a few examples. Another is a data inventory. This is something I did in probably about middle of my career as a teacher for the first time. Wow, was it an eye-opener. All this time, I had been using data that I found comfortable and familiar, a certain type of sources of information, for example. I was very predisposed to using multiple choice tests back then, I will not lie. They were easy. But always using the same types of data to inform decisions, for example, we want to shift away from that towards a data inventory where let's sit down, maybe with a colleague, what's a list of every single type of data source that we currently gather? What is their purpose? What questions do they answer? And then where are my data deserts? Where can I replenish them? Where can I spawn those or fuel those and offer water to those data deserts and expand the different types of data so that I can ensure that I'm always having the opportunity to get a complete picture of student learning and to inform my instructional planning next. And finally, a snapshot of a practice in here is going back to my treasure hunt. You guys heard I loved it. Go on that treasure hunt, not a witch hunt. But we need to move away from those statements that I shared at the beginning of the book, where we're zeroing in on broad summative trends. Oh, my whole class is low this year. Or if we happen to be looking at data, it's very easy, or we're all often at risk for zeroing in on one set of the data all of the time and never attending to the other ends. So maybe we only look at the data reflecting the lowest achievement levels, for instance. So when we go into that, we need to intentionally practice the habit of we are always going to select at least one positive outlier. What happened there? As Piper always said to me, Lindsay, you got to get curious. We need to seek to understand what powerful practices resulted in that data set. We need to go find out more about them, and we need to replicate them so that we have more and more treasures. So as we bring data to a close, Piper's going to take you on a journey through negativity, but I'm just going to highlight how data as a habit, you can imagine, serves all of the habits. So as an example, upholding high expectations for all students is a habit. We can use data to identify and what are those high expectations going to be and ensure that we're upholding them. We use data when we're informing goal decision making. For example, we're going to be looking at feedback as a habit specifically, and there's a lot of data use in using that feedback so that we can all grow ourselves. We mentioned the goal setting piece, and finally, as we look at all of this tying together in resiliency, you'll learn about how cultivating optimism relies heavily on data to offset those stories we make up in our heads that discourage and frustrate us. All right, and without further ado, I will pass it to Piper, who will take you on a journey through navigating negativity.
All right. So when we think about avoiding negativity, first I'm going to define that a little bit for us. Then we're going to navigate negativity within your team. So we've got a little activity we're going to talk you through that you could bring back tomorrow to a team or a PLC or a building. And then we're going to
Sorry.
that's okay. The last thing we're going to do is talk about how we can create a positive culture and navigate that negativity in common shared places, maybe like the teacher's lounge. So with that, without further ado, I like to just talk about what negative Nellies are and are not. So I think about what they are and are not. They're not those who ensure all voices are heard, seen, and valued. So they're not listening to everyone's voice. They do a lot of back channeling, triangulating with others, and talk about others in their absence. They do have armored personalities. So a lot of one of the phrases that Lindsay and I use frequently, it comes out of Brene Brown's work about armoring up, and that we can become very defensive when our armor is up, and we're going to talk a little bit more about that. So they do have a lot of armor on in those personalities. They seem unapproachable and easily find fault in others. It's always somebody else's problem. It's always the system's problem. It's always the parent's problem. It's always the student's problem. They do frequently blame others and rarely reflect on the impact that negativity might have on others. They do not focus, on conversations on facts and seek all perspectives. You can see how this one actually drives straight back into what Lindsay just talked about. So we're looking for evidence and the fact seeking. And a lot of times in that negative Nelly or Ned conversation, they are not doing fact checking. They are not highly reflective and do not seek to improve the culture of the team and the overall school. And so with that, like I said earlier, this chapter or this habit was challenging. We both kept kind of navigating away from it. I think because we both had experienced negativity. And the one thing I also want to describe here is I have called Lindsay and had a really bad day on occasion. It's when I call Lindsay and every single conversation becomes nagging and negative, and I'm just spiraling, right? And I bring her with me so that anytime I talk to her, we're venting about colleagues or we're talking about all the failed systems. And so there's a difference in venting and toxic, habitual, negative conversations. So I just want to throw that out there as well. So what I want you to do in chat is think about an experience where you've had a terrible meeting or a toxic team. I'm pretty confident every one of us can reflect back on a time that was really kind of stinky behavior. Maybe from ourselves even, right? So I want you to think about what that did to you physically. So for me, Lindsay and I joke because you're not going to know by looking at me that I am stressing out or that I'm frustrated or upset, I'm armoring up. But if you were to take my shoes off, you would see that my toes are crinkled up super tight and that I'm about to get a Charlie horse in the bottom of my foot because that is where I'm physically holding all that stress. So I want you just to pause and think about how does your body react when you have been in a terrible, toxic situation, whether that's a meeting or interacting with a team, and go ahead and drop that in the chat.
And I'll just share that mine is I clench my teeth. And it's, whew, I might be doing it for a long period of time too before I realize that it actually gets painful sometimes.
So what are those physical responses that you have that indicate, ooh, this is not going well? While you're thinking about that, I'm going to go on and just think about our emotional response is directly tied to our physical response. But emotionally, for me, I might feel sad, disappointed, frustrated. And so I can name that. The stressed out, which we named, is one of the reasons that we wanted to write this book on the habits. So all of those emotional responses, but definitely will then turn around and impact us physically, right? Like my toes will crunch up, and that's kind of my key to like, what are you feeling? Why are you feeling this way? I pick at my fingernails, and then I have to remind myself to breathe. And I remember
Mhm.
somebody in one of the chats at the beginning said, breathe, right? So I have to remember that too. Sometimes I can feel my shoulders, my rib cage is just, I'm holding my breath, right? Like, and so remembering to just do that regular deep breathing. I shut down, and unfortunately it shows my face. Yeah, some of us are extremely expressive with our nonverbal communication. So thank you for sharing that. The mental experience. So ineffective for me, I'm your creative person on your team. I'm going to think outside the box, and I always have like piperisms. And so those will come out if I am feeling super safe, but I'm going to sit quiet. Lindsay knows that I'm in trouble, or that she's in trouble, or the team's in trouble if I'm being super quiet, because I have just withdrawn and I'm not showing up and being my best version. Something has just shut me down. I've pulled my armor up. I'm no longer engaging mentally. Emotionally, I might be in fight, flight, or fawn, and physically, my toes are cramping up, right? So I think all of you are putting some great things here in the chat. Both of those happen with me as well. I wear my thoughts on my face. Yes. All right, so something that I was introduced to recently was this idea of the window of tolerance. And I'm such a visual person. And so I've put the window here, and you can see that this window is nice and big, and it's open. And the way that we keep that window open is a lot of times through team norms, or we're comfortable. And so the idea is that you want to remain inside this open window. But sometimes when we experience toxic groups or toxic meetings or individuals, that window like shrinks. And so they call it the window of tolerance. So the window shrinks and those shutters close. And then each of us has a response, a psychological response. So what we're really trying to create is psychological safety. However, when we don't feel psychologically safe, we do one of three things. We fight. So we might, some people actually might do it physically, or they do it verbally, or you can see it visually, like they're angry, they have that angry face, right? Or they freeze up, they flee, I'm a runner, or they fawn. Now, fawn is kind of that people-pleasing behavior. And so I'll do anything at my expense. I'm an enabler. And so I'm going to do anything to make the peace in my group, right? So that's what that fawn is. So I would like to invite you to be vulnerable right now. And if you know what your response, your normal response is, go ahead and drop that in the chat.
I'm just going to add in there, this always gets me thinking about different situations too, Pipe. So, I think about how power dynamics can influence my reaction in these scenarios, right? So I wonder what that might be a different way of thinking for people, because I've seen some examples. They're already saying, for example, I shut down. So I freeze, right? I freeze in the presence of someone I think of that might be in a position, not necessarily of authority, but some authority or some form of power dynamic there in my work or my role there. That makes me wonder about that one sometimes, because others I feel more confident. And then I might be more willing to not fight them, but make a stand, right? Stand up for myself or for the others that are involved in this maybe a tense situation. And then others I've been a fawn.
Right. And I think so, even naming, I definitely am a runner, and you and I laugh about this all the time. But there are scenarios. I have 4 adult kids. And let me tell you, as a mom, I have definitely have moments of fight, like, don't you dare do that to my kids. Like, is my personal response is to flee and run. But when it comes to taking care of my kids, I might have a different response. So I think that's
Good
really
point.
right? Like it's just something for us to marinate on. And the reason I'm having us even spend a moment here is it is really essential. In order for us to show up and be the best version of ourselves, we kind of need to know how we respond. We need to reflect ourselves, but we also need to know about our teammates and what their response is, and so that we can notice, oop, we just kicked some people out of the window of tolerance. And
Mhm.
how do we have some norms, or how do we make sure that everyone is feeling seen, valued, and heard, so that that window of tolerance can remain open? And that's when our creativity and that John Hattie work of the collective teacher efficacy really can be ignited. So what I want you to do the opposite of now is think about a time that you've been highly effective in a meeting or a team. And what was your physical response, or your emotional response, or your mental response? And again, feel free to take pictures of this. This work is all woven throughout chapter 9 in our book. But this is a great exercise to do with your team tomorrow, right? Like, how do we respond?
Kate, I so appreciate you being vulnerable about that. Just mentioning an explicit experience of fleeing, if you will, but just leaving a non-public meeting with a really tense situation with a board member. And there's moments we know that that might be the right decision to make too, right? I think about highly effective meetings type, and I've been a part of some good ones, I have to say. I'm excited and lucky to have experienced that, but it is so energizing. I mean, your heart can even start racing in a good way, right? The ideas flow and you feel like you're just in synergy with other people in the room. That emotional experience, I think you're definitely getting some, positive energy, your brain's flowing there. Physically, you're more relaxed, your body language, you're probably showing more leaning in type behavior. Yeah, board member problems. That's gonna go. We could do a whole series probably on navigating
We might have to
the
hit on
window of
the
tolerance with
leadership.
board.
We might have to
Right.
hit on that in the leadership book we're writing, Lindsay.
Yeah,
I
exactly.
think, and again, so the goal here is to highlight a time that was maybe toxic or threw you out of the window, and then to reflect on the opposite. What was a really good time? So one really great memory for me, Lindsay, when we first started charting out the chapters and habits and all the research that we did, and you came over and we had music on and we had chart paper all over my living room, and the two of us just really rolled up our sleeves. And when I think about that incredible experience, it just still brings me like joy emotionally, mentally. I think we were so creative, and we were able to just get so much accomplished. So the goal here is to be able to take your team through both scenarios, so that we start to recognize the power of that negative culture, and that what do we do to create that positive culture. So let's move forward onto the next. Let me just pause right there. At the last slide, the way that we can resolve some of that is through creating norms. And so it might be, I'm also very expressive with my face. And so we need to create norms that maybe that we get down to the nitty gritty of eye rolling is unacceptable. That the way that we use our tone with one another must be caring and kind. A lot of the school norms that I will see and have seen nationally look like start and end on time, be prepared. Those are all important. Don't get me
They're
wrong.
safe.
Right? But we're talking about what are those norms that are going to create psychological safety. And so going deeper and creating a space for us to talk more deeply about this is how I can show up and be my best, so that you want me on your team because I am super creative and you want me to be a part of that. So that's one way to navigate that negativity, is really bringing people through those two experiences and then creating those vulnerable norms. The next place that we have done a lot of conversations around, Lindsay, is the teacher lounge. And so we have seen both incredible things in teachers' lounges, and we've had a few moments of cringe because we've seen that negative culture show up. And so just addressing that in the teacher lounge, it's not going to be I'm going to one up you on how crazy my kids were today, or the crazy parent I had in the drop-off line or in the pickup line, or, the initiatives that are being put on this grade level versus that. We get into that competitive kind of negative, I'm going to one up you. And that can create that negative culture as well that can really become toxic. And so shifting that and thinking about a new phrase that I've heard over the weekend was GQ. We need to increase our GQ, which is our gratitude quotient. And that is really how we fight. It's the exact opposite of negativity. And we don't do that by just, trying to pretend like things are great, but it's that authentic space of being grateful. And so on the list here of things that you could do in a teacher lounge is having gratitude jars where teachers could shout out families or their admin or one another or their own class about things that have gone on, and just and making sure to focus on kind of those things that are going well, especially in a time of so much overwhelm. Jokes of the week are another one of my favorite things that I've seen. I've seen bulletin boards that are like, this or that. Do you like to paddleboard or jet ski? And so there's been like a this or that bulletin board that has just kept the conversation. Again, setting up norms that in this teacher lounge, we are going to focus on positive conversations and reserve those more private times that we do need to vent to one-on-one or in a different venue. So lots of different ideas here, celebrating birthdays and whatnot, but those common shared spaces, really creating norms and creating activities that will allow us to focus on more positive conversations.
Awesome. I love it. Thank you, Piper. So many inspiring things. Every time I think of those, we are coming to the end of our time together today, friends. So we are truly grateful that you gave an hour of your precious free time in the afternoon on a spring day to spend it with us and learn a little bit about some of the habits of resilient educators. This is a book that is jointly published with Corwin and Learning Forward and NWEA. It is the book study book for Learning Forward. If you also happen to cross over from ASCD and are a member with them as well, that's just getting started. We'd love to share an opportunity for you if you haven't read it to take an order on it. And that is actually directly through us as retailers with a 10% off and a free shipping. And this is a book I will say that is really, the audience here is definitely broad, but it is very particularly oriented towards those teachers that may be newer to the profession. And so we're working a lot with organizations right now around induction programs and such, and mentorship and instructional coaching programs, getting ready for this coming school year. We invite you to connect with us if you're active on social media, LinkedIn. Piper's not on Twitter, and to be very honest, I'm not much on there anymore, but nonetheless, we're around. It's been a pleasure, and we thank New Hampshire ASCD so much for bringing this on, and wish you all a wonderful, wonderful rest of the spring. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you too. Appreciate everything you do.
Thank you. It's been a joy.
Yeah. So can we get these slides to people, do you think?
Sure. Yeah, I'll send them to you in an email if that works.
Great. And it looks like some people are still on. We'll just send them out. We actually had 31 people register.
Hey, then that's a pretty good return rate, because I know, it's folks they'll register so they can watch the recording later, right? I do that.
Sure. So I'll stop the recording now.
Okay.